Domenico Scopelliti is the director of the Urban Planning and Public Space at City Milan Agency for Mobility, Environment and Territory, AMAT. He is an architect and has worked originally at AHUP and is now since many years in this field. And he will present the project Strade Piazze Aperte, which is also an initiative on public space from the city of Milan. And we really look forward to your contribution. Hello, Domenico. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just let me say that I'm Demetrio and not Domenico, but this is not a problem. Please, can you confirm you can see my screen so I can share my presentation and be sure that you all can see it? Okay, I see on the screen, so it should work. Well, I'm glad that I've been invited to this meeting, and I'm very sorry I couldn't attend by being there with you. What I'm going to present to you is the strategy that the city of Milan has developed in the last years, using tactical urbanism as a tool to implement it, particularly a strategy related to sustainable mobility and public space. Let me introduce the topic from a bit far, trying to define a framework. We all live in an urban age. We are aware of it since years. A huge part of our global population is living in cities, will to live in cities, has reasons to live in cities and in the urban context. And this phenomenon, this trend, is not going to change quickly, but probably is going to increase. Or predictions, or at least is what is the trend, how it's going up. And the second topic I want to introduce is the fact that we live in an era, a geological area, where everything that we change and everything that we implement affects our planet in a way that is not reversible anymore. I think this is a very important and strategic point of view to discuss about everything related to urban planning and design. As many other cities in the world, starting from this assumption, we are developing a plan for the city of the future. And as many other cities doing it, and as in general planning tends to do it, we aim to the next decade in order to define change. For basically, I think for a couple of reasons. One is because, of course, change is not that easy to be achieved, and that we need time in order to implement it. The second reason is that for planners, it's much more comfortable to say that we have a decade to make change in order to start doing something immediately. This is more a suspect that I had, and a bit suspicious about it by working in the public administration for years. But let's say that our plans, as many other cities are planning to do, set a series of new paradigms, trying to change from the whole concepts of consume to the one of reuse, trying to redevelop the idea of the gray city to a green city. We don't talk anymore about suburbs, we talk about neighborhoods and a multi-centric city. And we're trying to make a shift, which is easy to say, but not to do, about shifting our main core business from cars to people. In order to do that, of course, we always say that public space is a key element of our work. Probably the most important one is the place where we come together as people and we transform ourselves into citizens. Is the place where we negotiate the diversity. Is this place where more or less all of us should be equal. And of course, is the main core of all our planning. The urban master plan, the planning master plan, the sustainable urban mobility plan, the climate plan, the neighborhood plan, everything and everywhere we talk about public space as a common good. But reality is that we have to define what our public space is. And in the meantime, in the last years, we got a strange and incredible change of views of our public space from one day to another one when COVID-19 happened. We had all our lives completely changed from one day to another one. Our habits, we've been stuck home, particularly in Milan and in Italy, for months, something that was completely unacceptable and unexpected, and we probably would never accept for any other reason. We got our major and more important and more famous public space completely empty from one day to another one. And we were guessing about, in that period, about what was normal and what was not. If the use of the public space that we do, and you see a picture of a street, because streets is the major part of a public space in the city, was normal or not. We were guessing and wondering if the use of public space would have been the same after the pandemic, or if something would have changed. But more important of all, we guessed about normality. We really stressed the concept about going back to normality, imagining a new normality. And we started really reconsidering the fact that maybe not all of our habits were really normal. I don't know about what you think, but I'm not sure that this picture shows something normal for our cities. So what we tried to do during the pandemic was trying to redevelop the idea of not changing in the next decade, but starting doing something fast, quick, immediate, in order to adapt to the change the pandemic constrained us to live. Basically, during the pandemic, Milan was one of the few cities that worked on an adaptation plan. There was nothing else than an anticipation of the same concept and the same ideas that we were aiming to transform in the future by doing them now, immediately, the day after. Because what I think, and I end up my introduction, what I think is relevant for our cities nowadays is not just having a vision about what's next, about what the future should be. Because I think that's pretty easy somehow to do. It's somehow pretty easy to all agree about the fact that we should have a greener, a more sustainable, a more adaptable urban future. The issue is, how can we do it now without waiting for the next decades? Because we don't have that much time enough to wait for the next decade in order someone else would do it. In Milan, we are doing many different implementations, and we develop different strategies. We are changing major traffic nodes by participating to a competition like the Preventing Cities process, for instance, in collaboration with C40, where one of our major traffic nodes, Piazze Aperte, will be redeveloped thanks to the collaboration with the private sector into a proper plaza. We are working on infrastructure design, implementing new public spaces on the surface of a new metro line that we're building or a new tramway that we're building, trying to take all the opportunities of transformation into public space transformation opportunities. It's, for instance, something that we're doing with M4. That is now under construction and will be implemented and open in the next months. And then, of course, we have this is specifically Italian, but I think it will probably not that different in the rest of Europe. We have the set of the public works program, a 3 years program about all the different infrastructure, mobility, public space change that we will implement for the future in the city. issue is that basically this program, this methodology, the public works, they generally speaking last years from the first sketch to the implementation. Because what happens is that the political world define that there is a need for change, maybe following some complaint for the community. Someone would be appointed in the municipality in order to do the transformation, or with competition or whatever else. Then the design phase starts. You collect all the needs, you collect all the data, you start designing and defining an idea, you engage with the community, you engage with the other departments, you change the project 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times as needed. Then you go for the approval. Then there is the definitive design phase. Then there is the executive design phase. All the phases needs an approval. And then when everything seems to be ended, you start the bid for construction works. But then there are legal issues, and then the constructor that you appointed maybe failed for whatever reason, and you have to change them, etc., etc., etc. What happens is that since the moment you start with the idea of transforming a change to the moment where you allocate money and the moment where you have final design to be approved and that you can start the construction site, it takes so many years that probably the people who were asking for a change will move somewhere else. It's so many years that the project that you design is old. And so many years that what happens is that when you have everything in place to build it, you realize that that project was wrong and it's not reversible and you cannot change it and fix it anymore. And of course, this is something that we cannot avoid for certain areas, for certain reasons. But it can be also informed and helped and supported by another methodology, which is typically a bottom-up one. Is a methodology we stealed from the guerrilla practices, we steal from the community practices, and we got help in order to do it, particularly by Bloomberg Associates and Janet Sadiq Khan, that has a collaboration with the city of Milan started in 2018. And we realized that actually, if there is a certain amount of project that can be implemented by the typical public works process, there is many more that we can test and experiment and try before making them permanent through tactical urbanism. Basically, by doing light, quick, cheap interventions that cost thousands of euros instead of millions, that last months from the first line on the drawing, on the paper, to the implementation. And the most important thing of all, they are completely reversible. You can change them from one day to another one with the same flexibility that you realize them. And what is very important about reversibility is that everything that you can change allows you to be more radical in getting the right decision, and the decision that is more oriented towards the future in respect to the permanent design that has to be negotiated with all the different stakeholders on the paper without being experienced, and with the risk that you really spend a lot of public money on something that we will get very old in a very short period of time. And this is more or less the methodology that we are starting using in the city of Milan, and we started in 2018 particularly, just before the pandemic, in order to implement public spaces. So let's take this example, for instance, this piazza called Piazza d'Ergano, which is the first tactical urbanism project that we implemented here in Milan. In 2017, it was a car park, a more or less anonymous car park, hosting 25 cars. In 2018, we decided that could have been the first test in order to experiment tactical urbanism. We made the experiment. It was a place where we already had allocated money for a permanent design change. In 2021, the permanent design was already implemented there, thanks to but without waiting for it to be implemented, but with all the experience and data and monitoring coming from the temporary phase. And what the community saw in that case is that change, it was fast and continuous, and there was not there were not needed 4 years of waiting in order to see it realized. And the tools that we used in order to first thing that we had to do when we started working on the tactical urbanism implementation was defining our kit. We needed to define what we could use in order, we were able to use in order to make these lightly cheap interventions, and how we involve the community in order to be part of the transformation. The first thing that the most important thing that we use in our changes, in our projects, is street marks. The same street marks that you would do to define a car parking lot. Well, that's an incredible design tool in order to change the use of the street from one day to another one. The traffic paint then could be also helpful to highlight the transformation and the pedestrian area you will realize thanks to the tactical urbanism process, also including public art as part of the transformation by involving artists, by collaboration with artists. Then we use bollards and curbs, another element that we need, unfortunately, to protect our public spaces from cars. That is something we should think about when we, as humans, we protect ourselves from cars in our public spaces. And then we use street furniture, the most simple one, the cheapest one, the simplest and cheapest one that we are able to procure without any special procedure, but by using the maintenance budgets that we already have. And then we put some activators. To be honest, we've tried some, but there's no other activators like the ping pong tables that was successful here in Milan as the ping pong table. And then we involved volunteers since the first plaza in the realization and implementation of the process in the project. This is particularly relevant because there's nothing as powerful as seeing people reclaiming public space and taking care of public space by implementing it in their neighborhood. And that moment of reappropriation of the space gives a great and strong power to the people that live in the neighborhood to see that they can be part of a change. And we not only involve them, but in the meantime that we were delivering our programs, we also approved an act that regulates the collaboration between the possible collaboration between the city and the citizens, through an instrument called collaboration pact, basically a contract where we agree about who's responsible for what in the collaboration of a transformation of public space. And this also helps and facilitates the generation of community events organized by the population, which are very important to strengthen the community and the sense of community around the transformation and the change. And then, most important of all, we allow public life to happen. Public life and then everyday public life is the final aim of our transformation. It's the most important one. And because the public life is the moment where everything that we design can succeed. And designing public space is definitely designing the unexpected to happen. And we saw many unexpected things happening in our projects. This methodology basically was born and started the implementation of a program in the city of Milan called Piazze Aperte, Open Plazas. As I said, this was the first pilots were dated in 2018. We delivered a series of pilot projects also in 2019, basically with a more top-down approach by picking corners and places that where we saw there was a potential for transformation. And those pilot projects were very important for us to understand where this methodology could be very successful, where a bit less, what we were able to do in order to use tactical urbanism as a potential for change, and also to align the public administration on a methodology that was new and was not easy to convince everyone at the beginning that was potentially successful. And in 2020, by the end of 2019, to be honest, we defined that the project was mature enough to change approach and become a bottom-up one by asking through an open call that we did to the public, where citizens, active citizens, and different stakeholders could have proposed the transformation of the public space they were interested to, not just proposing a potential transformation, but proposing their collaboration to a potential transformation. In 2 months, we got 65 proposals involving hundreds of citizens, hundreds of NGOs, shops, private people, private sponsors, private institutions and public institutions, schools, even priests and different stakeholders that were interested to reclaim public space in front of their house. We got 65 proposals, and in the meantime, since 2018 to nowadays, we implemented 38 projects. One is under construction now, these days. Another one is under approval, and others are under development. This is the map of our Piazze Aperte open plazas. As you can see, we are not concentrating much in the city center, but what we're trying to do is developing a strategy where plaza next to everyone's door can be one of the pillars of the development of a 50-minute city, of a city of proximity. And we realized that we already reached half of the population of Milan with a Piazze Aperte in less than 50 minutes walk from their house. The typologies of interventions that we developed is basically based on the realization of new plazas or pedestrian area by reusing the street as a public space. Sometimes we just activate public space that is already existing but is underused. In other projects, we also extended curbs, or we targeted the transformation to traffic safety measures. And by using Piazze Aperte, we tested also the implementation of very light, quick, and cheap bike connections that could be key for the neighborhood and for the public space use. This is the first project I showed you before, Piazza d'Ergano, dated 22nd of September 2018, workout-free day. And this is the picture of how it was. Basically, a public space dedicated to cars, a piazza by name, but not by fact, that was used by 25 cars, parked for 90% of their time stuck there without moving, instead of being the gathering place of the whole neighborhood that could host hundreds of people doing any kind of activity, playing, discussing, chatting, taking a bike sharing, eating food, hosting listening to a concert, organizing a public meeting, or whatever else. This is a picture of our first opening party of Piazze Aperte. I can assure you it's a day I would never forget, because we were so impressed by how many people could leave that space that 2 weeks before was just a car park. And the nice thing and the incredible thing is that since the first moment we closed it to traffic and opened to people, it seemed that it was always been there. And you can see the images by changing from a temporary painting polka dots pattern to a stone one. The use of the public space has remained more or less the same, as the plaza was always been there. And I remember very well the first public meeting when we went saying we will change that space from 25 car parks to a public plaza. And I remember very well the reaction of the population. But by testing, by experiencing the change, we overcome the resistance. And now I think if you go to that neighborhood and say, I would put 25 car parks in the piazza because it's better hosting space for cars than people, people would have the same reaction. They would overreact and say that that's not possible because nobody in the neighborhood is still thinking about having back public car parks instead of public space. And this is another project that we developed in 2019. It was a key project for us. It's called Spazio. It's a redundant street space like many there are in our cities. Very gray. All maneuver are allowed and permitted. What is key about this public space is that the picture that you see is taken from a school. And that space, that crossing, was impossible to be crossed by people, but just for cars. And when we changed this space, we tried to shift the perspective from a car-oriented one to a people and children-oriented one. And we saw that actually maybe the barrier that you can see on the bottom part of the picture was not enough to host people, because the amount of people gathering there was so big during the opening and exiting the school that needs more public space. And this project was so successful, it was so incredible that we realized that the center of the neighborhoods could have been the schools in all the different projects. And that's the reason why we are now developing the future of the program oriented to the school space, like this Piazza Sicilia, another redundant street that has been transformed during the pandemic into a space for people, where the community gathers in front of the schools every day. Or like this Piazza del Balcone, one of our most famous example of double stop, a space where traffic engineers define that cars can do whatever, even decided to stop in a 50 meters long line, and that cars was already using the space in order to moderate the redundancy and by illegal parking, like you can see in this picture. Well, we transformed this space into something like that, a playground, a space in front of a school. The children every day at 5 o'clock will meet after the schools and play for hours together with their parents. These are some of the example of the 38 projects that we developed. And we published a project report of what we did in the last 3 years. And we announced, thanks to Mayor Sala participating to the project report presentation, to the next open call that we will launch next month, open and targeted to the school spaces particularly. There are also issues related to this approach. Of course, you need strong communication. Of course, there is procurement and maintenance issue. There could be a lack of executive activation, and there is a way to be very very well organized to go from interim to permanent design process. But it's key that this methodology was not just helpful to define the public space, but that during the pandemic, it opened to a wider approach to the street, the program that we called Open Streets, and we launched the pandemic in order to rethink this use of the space also for mobility reasons, by realizing 65 kilometers of new bike lane in a year, compared to the typical 1, 2, 3 kilometers that we were used to implement it, by just doing it quickly, with less money than what we expect, by just tracing line, because change is in the habits and not just in the infrastructure. And the demonstration of this is that when we develop a new car park protected bike lane in Corso Buenos Aires, one of our major traffic access and commercial access of the city, we saw that immediately the number of bikes increased very quickly, and in the peak hours there were more bikes than cars in that street. We realized that there's something very easy about traffic, that if you can create an infrastructure for bikes, even if it's just painted, bikes will come. And the modal shift in those spaces can change dramatically in a couple of years. This is the modal shift changing, and is still changing in Corso Buenos Aires since 2019 to 2022. Bikes increased from being the 5% to the 27% of the modal shift. And useless to say, this was not easy, we got strong political polarization of these projects. There is issues about and discussions about what should be a safe design approach, what not. We continue to monitor the spaces, which is key. But again, we transform completely the perception of the use of some public spaces from some streets in order to develop more democratic and integrated streets. Last but not least, during the pandemic, we also developed a street trees project with the facilitation of implementation by the privates, by the shops, of new terraces instead of car parks in the city. I don't have to highlight which use is more beneficial for the communities. I don't have to highlight which use is more beneficial for the privates, also in terms of economics. This project was key because it was doing two things. One was putting the shop owners that are generally speaking against the pedestrianization in order to promote them by making the city just facilitating the implementation. And second thing, we negotiated the fact that car parking is a right. Car parking is not a right, it's a privilege. And that's use of a car space can be used for anything else and can be negotiated by many other citizens by having dinner or breakfast there, by planting a tree, by, I don't know, putting some bench. And this is another step towards a change of the use and conception of the public space that we are trying to develop, also learning from our mistakes and also learning by doing towards the idea that public space is our major asset as public administrator, and particularly because streets are public spaces. And we conceive streets as public spaces for people. We can allow in those spaces to make people building communities by being part of the change. And this is the key lesson I wanted to share with all of you. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And I'm available, of course, for discussion and questions. Thank you very much.